Alright students, today our topic is setting research design. Very important topic. It's about setting a methodology. Now, as we are quite clear about the key purpose of the study, if we have finalized the key objectives of the study, we know the research model, the conceptual framework or theoretical framework. Now it's time to go for a practical field study. And practical field study is basically an action stage where you have to collect data. But to collect data, you need to be clear about the different aspects of collecting data of your specific field study. And there are various aspects what you have to consider. There are various components of a research design, the parameters of the research design. And we obviously cannot discuss all of those factors, but we are going to discuss some of the common and some of the important aspects of a research design. For example, we are going to discuss today the population, the sample size, the sampling type, the instrument, and maybe some other important features. Once you are clear about your research objectives, what you have to do. For example, your research objective or the purpose of study can be an employee motivation, customer motivation, student motivation, investment behavior, basic financial behavior of the individuals, of households. Well, what you think, from whom you are going to collect data? Are you going to collect data maybe for student satisfaction or motivation from the students who are everywhere across the world? Practically it's not feasible, of course. If you are interested to know employee motivation towards their organization, is it about the employee motivation across the world? Of course not. So basically, you know the population, you know the limited or the pool of individuals which you wish to investigate or where you wish to generalize the result of the study. A population is the pool of individuals or objects from which a sample is drawn for a study. It refers to the entire group of people or things of interest that the researcher wishes to investigate. So, in this case, a population is the pool of individuals or the objects. One thing for sure, sometimes our researches are unobtrusive or sometimes it's obtrusive research. Normally, commonly in social sciences, we go for studies where individuals or humans are involved. Especially in a survey studies, we have to either conduct interview or we have to give them the questionnaire, a performa, to get them filled, and finally there is a analysis process. But it may be sometimes the objects or the things or the events or the organization as a whole. So all it depends on the purpose of the study. So let me clear one point. The population cannot be every time the individuals or the humans. It can be objects as well. So what I told you, what we call the unobtrusive kind of researches, it can be even the diaries or the register or the contents of the newspaper or something like that. But in all the cases, you need to be clear about which source you are going to use to collect data. If it's about the individuals or a person or people living in a particular area, then obviously you need to create a boundary. Basically, population is a pool of the individuals. It's about the group of individuals, or basically it's about the number of persons in a particular territory or in a geographical area. Well, that confinement can take any position, but you need to be clear, like the way I was discussing about the employee motivation or investment behavior. So employee motivation of what? The employee motivation can be of those who are working in a public sector, in a private sector. So are you going to take everyone on a board who are working in a public sector, so you can further limit your population in terms of maybe working in an educational sector, oil and gas sector, and maybe the cellular sector. So it means we need to create a boundary. The boundary, the pool of individuals in a limited capacity. So here we have an example for you. For instance, if a manager of a multinational company wants to know the kinds of toys local kids in Pakistan prefer to play with, then all kids in Pakistan will be the population. In this case, someone who's a manager in a multinational company, he wants to know the kinds of toys local kids in Pakistan prefer to play. So here I can see there are three aspects. One is the researcher, and it is a manager of a multinational company. And what he wants to know, what kind of toys kids prefer in a limited territory, and that limited territory is basically the Pakistan. So it means all the kids in Pakistan are basically the population. Here you can see it's quite difficult to collect data from all the individuals or all the kids from Pakistan, though we are going to make some sample. The sampling is important in this case, but as we are concerned to generalize the result to Pakistan, then it means you need to collect data from different corners of Pakistan, though it's not about collecting data from all the kids who are in a Pakistan. Rather, you have to make a sample, a limited individuals, the limited elements who are going to be part of that sample. But yeah, for sure, you have to go in a different corners of Pakistan, and then we can make that generalization. Here the point of concern is you need to confine your population. So what I told you, all the kids, if they constitute the population of the study, then it means you need to follow a system. We are going to discuss about the sampling type later on in another video, but normally we have to create boundary. We have to limit our population. You have to think pragmatically about what constitutes the population of the study. So first foremost is, and normally that's what we do, is limiting the population in terms of the geographical area. Pakistan is a geographical area, but Pakistan is a quite big country, and obviously all the employees, all the individuals, maybe the students who are studying in Pakistan, though you may treat them as the population, but for that you need efforts and other resources to collect data. So it can be the population of your study may be limited to a provincial area, a district or a division, or maybe a city. And then the population can be divided in terms of the sector or the industry. Your population can be a cellular industry, or it can be even a sports sector or something like that. Sometimes the population can be in terms of the organization, and the study is limited to that particular organization. Population can be limited to a hierarchical level, and it means there are different hierarchies in the organization. So are you going to approach all the individuals across the board, or are you going to target only the staff level or the management level? And then at a management level we have lower level, middle level, and upper level of management. It can be another criteria, or maybe Limiting the population can be in terms of the functional area. Are you going to just collect data from the marketing department, from the finance department, the HR department, or the all departments? uh, some topics are more gender specific. For example, if you are interested to approach and to collect responses from the females, like the women who are working at leading positions, now it means it's just about the women, the females, and only those who are working at a managerial capacity. But there are so many other ways to limit the population. It can be even the tenure of the employment, their earnings, and so on and so forth. But the point here is you need to limit the population. You have to think pragmatically what is basically your population, because you need to generalize the results to that population. You are going to collect data from a limited number of individuals, but obviously for that you need to follow a system, a process. But basically the point here is, if your population is quite broad, there are so many number of elements over there, then it means you have to collect as much data and you need more of the resources. So try to limit your population and think pragmatically, and this is how we have to be very much conscious about the population. So let's see some of the examples. What you think about these three examples? If a general manager marketing of electronic products wants to know the consumer buying behavior of teenagers in central Lahore, keep in mind we have to figure out three elements. Number one, who's the researcher? Number two, what is the purpose of the study? And number three, the population of the study. If a general manager marketing of electronics products wants to know the consumer buying behavior of teenagers in central Lahore, so general manager marketing of any company electronic products, he is the researcher, or he is interested to conduct this research. What is the purpose? To know the consumer buying behavior. And what is the population? It's about the teenagers, and the teenagers mean starting from 13 to onward 19. So that age group is just the population. But those teenagers, if they belong to Chitral or Hyderabad or the Peshawar, so they are not basically the population. It's about only those who are in a central Lahore. If a teenager is somewhere in a south Lahore, so he is not going to be counted as the population. So teenagers in a central Lahore constitute the population of the study. If local government is interested to know the saving habits of married women working online in the capital city of Pakistan, again the three aspects. Number one, the researcher, the purpose, and the population. If local government is interested, so local government is basically the researcher, or they are interested in this research to know the saving habits. Saving habit is basically the purpose. What kind of saving habits people have? But in this case, the population is women, but married women, and those who are working but working online. And then we have that geographical confinement, a geographical boundary. So it means married women who are working online in the capital city, that is in Islamabad of Pakistan. If HR manager is investigating the work motivation of newly hired employees in a telecom firm of Haripur, recently participated in the 3 days webinar. This one is a bit tricky. Here again we are interested to know the researcher, the purpose, and the population. The researcher is HR manager is investigating the work motivation of newly hired employees. Basically, he is interested to know the employee motivation. You can term them as a work motivation, but of those, only those who were newly hired in telecom firm of Haripur, so that city is important, but only those who also participated in the 3 days webinar. So anyone who's a newly hired, even he's working in a Haripur, but he didn't take part in a 3 days webinar or a kind of the training, so he's not going to be counted as the element or the part of the population. So the unit of population is going to be a newly hired employee in a telecom sector, in a telecom firm of a Haripur who participated in a 3 days webinar. So now can you make a guess about these 4 examples? PTA is interested to know the reasons behind switching mobile operators by college graduates in urban areas of Pakistan. A faculty member of a local university is interested to know what old age employees like to do after retirement from public sector in Lahore. Management of a cellular company wants to know the reason of quitting intentions of new inductees in head office. Head of the department HOD is interested to examine the class participation of female students coming from remote area and enrolled in MBA Rural Development. So basically it's an exercise. You have to first test your knowledge for this unit. PTA is interested to know the reasons behind switching mobile operators by college graduates in urban areas of Pakistan. You have to figure out a researcher, who's the researcher, what is the objective of the study, and what is the population. And you have 30 seconds to think over it. Yeah, you are quite right. PTA is a researcher. Objective is reasons behind switching mobile operators, and population is college graduates in urban areas of Pakistan. Another example. A faculty member of a local university is interested to know what old age employees like to do after retirement from public sector in Lahore. Who is the researcher, what is the objective, and what is the population? You have 30 seconds. Researcher, a faculty member of a local university. Objective, work activities after retirement. So that objective is important. Work activities after retirement of home of those old age employees retired from public sector in Lahore. Management of a cellular company wants to know the reason of quitting intentions of new inductees in head office. You have 30 seconds to think over it about the researcher, objective and population. Researcher, management of a cellular company. Objective, the reason of quitting intentions. Population, new inductees in head office of cellular firm. The last test or last example. Head of the department is interested to examine the class participation of female students coming from remote area and enrolled in MBA rural development. So what is the purpose, who is the researcher, and what is the population? You have 30 seconds again. Researcher, head of the department. Objective, to examine the class participation. Population, female students enrolled in MBA rural development program and also those who belong to remote areas. Now we come over to another aspect of research design, and that is an element. An element is a single member of the population. Basically, element is a single unit of the population. For example, if 900 employees in a private organization are to be interviewed, then each employee therein is an element. So what I told you, an element is a single member or a unit of the population. So basically, when you know the total count of the population, it means you know the total count of the elements. If all 100 containers are to be inspected by local police, it shows 100 elements in the population, because in this case the police know the total count, and that is they have to inspect 100 containers, and these 100 containers are the population. When researcher examines all the elements instead to draw a sample, it is characterized as census. Census is basically is a count of all elements in a population. So sometimes, maybe most of the time, we go and collect data from a sample, but if you are not going for a sampling, then it means you are going for a census. When you have limited count of the elements, we have very limited population, then we can go for the census, or otherwise we go for sampling. Sampling frame. A sampling frame is a list of the items or people forming a population from which a sample is taken. Such listings are already developed for some other purposes and considered as sampling frame. Now just think about a situation if you have to conduct a research in an organization which is quite new for you, or if you are hired as a consultant, you have a lot of interest in a research and you know how to conduct research, but you don't have any close contact in the organization. If you are already working in the organization, then obviously you know from where to collect data, or maybe you have some understanding, some social contacts with individuals. But what if the organization itself is new for you? You are just a consultant or researcher and you have to collect data. It's not about just going to randomly to different individuals and asking them to fill the questionnaire or requesting them for the interview. Rather, you need to follow a system. You need a time, a venue, and obviously their consent. Basically, you need a sampling frame. You need to have the list, a complete data of the individuals who are working in a particular sector or in a limited in an area or maybe in an industry. And for that, like how you can collect that list. Obviously you cannot develop that list for this purpose. If you are going to develop this list, then it's going to be an added exercise. Normally sampling frame is available. It means the list is available and you are going to treat that list as a sampling frame. For example, if you are studying and if you are enrolled in a university, and if I as a researcher is going to collect data from the students of that university where you are enrolled, then I am going to the admission department and I am going to request them to give me the list of the students who are enrolled in this semester, and that list is basically their own record. And if they are going to provide me that list, I'm going to treat that list as a sampling frame. If I am interested to collect data, to interview, or to get some questionnaires filled from any organization, then obviously I am going to approach HR department, the payroll department, and obviously if an employee is working in the organization, then obviously he's working for the pay, for the salary, and the payroll department, they do have the data of the individuals, not only uh, where they are working, like their department and their position, but also their home or residential address. So by collecting that list, I'm going to treat that list as a sampling frame, and then I can make some I can go systematically, or I can randomly encircle some individuals, and I'm going to take appointment and request them to into to fill the questionnaire, or maybe to entertain the interview process. In an opinion poll, possible sampling frames include an electoral register or a telephone directory. Other sampling frames can include school class roster or register, patient files archived in a hospital, organizations listed in a thematic database, and so on. Here you can again see these are normally available in the organization and you don't need to develop them. An organizational employee database or register can be considered as a sampling frame if all employees are to be examined. Likewise, the university registry containing a listing of all faculty, administrators, and sports staff in the university during a particular academic year or semester could serve as the population frame or the sampling frame for a study of the university population. And here, sometimes sampling frame is also called the population frame, but commonly we call them the sampling frame. The third important aspect of the research design or setting the methodology is the sample. Sample is a subset of the population. It comprises some members selected from population. In other words, some but not all elements of the population would form the sample. Precisely, a sample is a subset of the population, but it represents the characteristic of the population. It represents the characteristics of the population means you can generalize the findings, conclusion or the results to the larger population. You are going to collect data from a limited set of individuals, but that result is going to be generalized. Generalized means you can apply the results to the population, or what are their responses collectively. We may think about these are the responses of all the elements or the population. If 225 implies out of 900 are to be interviewed, then 225 members form the sample for the study. That is, from a study of these 225 employees, the researcher would draw a conclusion about the entire population of the 900 employees of private organization. Likewise, if there are 145 patients in a hospital and 40 of them are to be surveyed by the hospital administrator to assess their level of satisfaction with the treatment received, then these 40 members will be the sample. So basically, I am going to collect data, or I am going to survey 40 patients, and well, if they are satisfied, so it means I can think about all the 145 patients are satisfied, and if I feel 40 sample or the subjects are not satisfied, then it means all the 145 patients are not satisfied. So having said that, it means that limited responses I collected are basically generalized or reflecting the opinion of that population. That population means basically those who fall within the limit of the study. A sample is thus a subgroup or subset of the population. By studying the sample, the researcher should be able to draw a conclusion that would be generalizable to the population of interest. Subject. A subject is a single member of the sample, just as an element is a single member of the population. For survey researches, subjects are also called the respondents. Subject is a single member of the sample. The same way, we considered each and every individuals or the objects in the population is an element. So once we are going to collect data and we have created a sub-boundary for the sample, so it means all those who are falling in that boundary of the sampling, so they are the subjects, and they can be anything: humans, employees or a student or the customer, or it can be objects, events, organization, or maybe the books or anything like that. But each and every unit or a single member of the sample is the subject. But commonly in a management sciences, we call them the respondents. The reason is commonly, it's not the case at a larger level, but normally since our studies, especially in management sciences and more particularly the studies of marketing and HR and the management, they are based on a surveys, interview surveys or the questionnaire surveys. So that's why we call them the respondents, because they are giving us their responses. But Here we can also reasonably say that all the subjects are also the elements, but all elements cannot be the subjects, because the subjects are drawn from the elements or the group of elements, but some are going to be selected as a subject. So it means all the elements cannot be the subjects, rather the limited subjects, the limited elements are going to be the subjects. If 225 implies out of 900 are to be interviewed and form the sample of the study, then each implies among 225 selected would be counted as subject or respondents. So all the individuals falling in the category of the sample are going to be treated as a subjects. The other case, which is the case of the unobtrusive research, if 25 containers out of 100 are to be inspected by local police, then each of 25 container would be counted as subject. Now we come over to the most important part of research design, or developing a mechanism to determine sample size. What should be the appropriate sample size, because that count is important, reason being the results have to be generalized to the population. So we need to have a reasonable size of the sample. Well, if the population is 900, that's what we have just seen. So why we were going for 225 individuals? What if the population was 145 patients? So why we were going for 40 patients? Why not 100 and why not just 10? There should be a criteria, and there are various criterias. For example, Roski 1975 and Cohen in 1969, they prescribed a sample size between 100 to 500 subjects appropriate for most of the studies. So you can take sample between 100 to 500. There is another quite common method, and that is based on a statistical formulas. You can find various formulas, statistical formulas, those who've been in the statistic or who are the statisticians, so they know the formulas, and based on those formulas you can determine the sample size. Then there is another way, and that is a sample size should be more than 10 times of the total variable in the study, and these are the references. So these authors prescribed that the sample size should be more than 10 times of the total variable. So if you have 10 variables, so it means your sample size should be 100 or more than, greater than 100. The fourth one is 20 to 25% of the total population elements. So it means that is, I would say, the common way to determine the sample size, and that what you can observe in the previous slides, our sample size was the 20 to 25%, and more likely it was 25% of the total count or the total population. So 900, right? So you can see it was the 225. It was 2 to 5, which is quite amicable to believe a good sample size. Then the rule of thumb is 200 plus is a good way. Here I can point out one important aspect, and that is in majority of cases you need to know the total count of the population. For example, to go for the statistical formula, you need to know the total count, the total elements of the population. And again, about the 20 to 25%, it's about once you know your population is 100 elements maybe, so it means 25. If it's about 1000, then you can go for 250. So you need to know the exact count, and unfortunately in social sciences, in social or management sciences, we don't literally know the total count of the population. There is a rule of thumb that 200 plus subjects or the respondents provide a good sample size, and good sample size means that is the representative. Well, sample should be representative, means that should reflect the characteristics of the population, and there are various ways to determine the representativeness of the sample, and one, the most important factor is that the sample size should be good enough, or that should be that should follow a criteria. Then there is another method, and it's about, this one is quite common in Pakistan. I can see so many of the students, they follow this criteria. It's basically a table by Kretschy and Morgan. They developed in 1970, and this table, I believe it's also based on a statistical formula. And here we have the total count of the population, and here we have the sample size. For example, if total count or total elements in the population are 10, then you have to go for 10 subjects or respondents. In case if it's about 400 elements in the population, then the sample size should be 196. In case if it's about 75,000, then the sample size should be 382. But here is another very important point. If you think your sample size should be 350, it doesn't mean you are going to float 350 questionnaires, rather you have to go for 700 questionnaires. So, well, all it depends on the temperament and the nature of the elements, but amicably we may recommend to go for the double of the sample size. Like in case if your sample size is around 350, then you should go and float the questionnaires up to 700. So if it's about 500 sample size, then 1000 questionnaires should be floated. Well, before proceeding, let me highlight, the point is quite important. Among all those different ways to determine the sample size, which one is the best way? Well, from my practical experience, it's quite difficult to make a common ground. Like if you are going through good researches, I mean the credible researches, and credible I mean the researches published in referred journals, in a high impact factor journals, it's not very common to write about the source or the reference, like which criteria you are following. So the criterias, even the 4 or 5 criterias what we just discussed, so these are not going to be highlighted in the researches or in the authentic or credible researches. And there is a reason. But I told you, basically normally we are not quite sure about the total count of the population. We never know the total elements. Even we know, but we cannot be 100% confident about the total count of the population or the total elements in the population. Well, if you know, then obviously you can go for that. But basically the main criteria to determine the sample size is you have to go for up to 350 the sample size. And why 350? Because according to statisticians, the parametric test, you may apply the parametric test if your sample size is 350 or above. Well, obviously, it's not a kind of the consensus among the statisticians or the authors. Like somewhere for some of the parametric tests, you may go above or beyond 200 or sometimes 300. So there is no consensus. But amicably, what I have seen, it's about the 350 or 400 is the amicable sample size to go for the statistical test, to go for the inferential statistic. So basically the criteria is what test you are going to apply. For regression analysis, for factor analysis, what the authors has recommended to go for 350 or 400 sample size, that is the amicable and that is quite plausible to generalize the results. So the basically you are not going to find any criteria or any source like we prescribed, or we, even if it's there, but we cannot follow one or two references or one or two evidences. Basically it's about, it's quite, things are quite silent in a good researches. So better is to go for up to 350 subjects or responses, and that means people are going to have confidence on your study. So simply stated, 350 or above is a good sample size. So now we come over to the reason for sampling. Well, it's not indispensable to go for sampling, but there are various reasons, and according to authors, you should go for sampling when you can generalize the result to the population. So why you should go for census? You can go for sampling. So here I got the 4 different opinions or the reasons. The first reason is, in research investigations involving several hundreds and even thousands of elements, it would be practically impossible to collect data from or test or examine every element. Now it means, let's say there are 100 elements in the population, you can collect responses. If it's about 200, you can collect responses. Even 500 responses can be collected. But what if the total elements are 20,000 or 50,000? So in that case, practically it's quite difficult or nearly impossible to collect data. Secondly, it would be undesirable in terms of time, cost and other human resources. So what we have discussed, you need more and more resources. Resources include time is a resource, money is a resource, and your energy is also a resource. So why you are putting so much efforts, why you are spending so much resources when the results are going to be the same? If you can, if you are following all the protocols, and if you are collecting data from 400 individuals or the subjects, the respondents, and you can apply those results to up to maybe 10,000 individuals, then it means why you should go for the 10,000 elements when the results are going to be the same, provided if you are following all the standards, all the protocols of the research, the results are going to be the same. Study of a sample rather than the entire population is also sometimes like to produce more reliable results. The reason is quite obvious, because again if you are going for 10,000 elements, you are collecting data, you are getting the questionnaires filled from the 10,000 individuals or elements, then it means now you'll have to punch all the data, and yeah, there can be human error or there can be a typographic mistake or typographic mistakes. So it means higher the frequency of the responses, then it means there is the possibility of the mistakes or the unintentional distortion of the data. The last one is, in few cases it would also be impossible or sometimes destructive to use the entire population to gain knowledge about or test something. Well, we call it the destructive sampling. For example, if you think otherwise, if you think about the unobtrusive researches like how I can measure the total life of a light bulb. Let's say I have produced 1000 bulbs and I have to consume maybe 10 to 20 bulbs to see their total life, and by counting that average I can come over to the average life of these bulbs. So the other way around can be, I have to consume all the elements or all the light bulbs, so it means it's going to be quite destructive. So in this case it's not about interviewing, it's not about the questionnaire, survey questionnaire, it's about the researches which involves objects or the things. So this is how we determine the life of the object or anything. For example, when automobile manufacturers they produce the cars, there is a very common and I would say it's a must test. We call it the crash test, which is about they have to crash the car up to a very high speed and to see the angle and the other ways to what extent and how the damages were made within the car and outside the car. So these crash tests are important. So what if your car cost millions of dollars? So maybe you can go for some of the cars for the crash test. Is it possible to take all the cars who were produced recently from your factory, from your production area? So it's not feasible. You cannot have the crash of all the cars. It's going to be quite destructive. It's going to be itself damaging for your organization. So the crash test is going to be limited to some of the cars. So on this note, thank you very much, and if you have questions, so you can write in the chat box and I'm always available to answer your questions. Thank you very much.